Welcome on Asset Entertainment. This evening we shall study all the backstage decision taking, consequences, and process of the new European tax on tourism. Tourism is an important economic sector bringing a very substantial contribution to the European economy. However, it is not all benefits. The massive arrival of tourists can cause pollution, a gentrifying process displacing both local businesses and residents, the loss of local culture, and the rise in housing prices.
To remedy this, the European Union has put a taxing system in place. We can find it under different forms, such as visa fees, airport taxes, domestic tour operator, VAT, or the occupancy tax. Maintaining competitiveness in the tourism industry, particularly in light or increasing global competition. Today, we are going to focus on occupancy tax only.
Tourism is a very dynamic sector that creates jobs and workforce and that increases the economic wealth of a country or a region. For example, when talking about Spain, the total contribution to the GDP is of 158.9 billion euros, and its contribution to the employment is of approximately 2.652 million jobs. To maintain these figures and competitiveness, some governments apply different taxes so that the revenue is created, which will then be reinvested in the tourism industry, compensating the externalities that tourism creates and mentioned previously. For example, the sustainable tourism tax generated 13 million in revenue for the Balearic Island government in 2016. 80% of this revenue was spent on environmental protection and water supply, and the remaining 20% focused on other tourism-related projects. However, applying taxes on tourism can have a negative outcome, a loss, which will vary depending on the elasticity of demand. Stay tuned to see how this happens.
In exclusivity, the Sade School of Economics has allowed us to take part in one of Louis-Vancouver's classes.
Louis Vancouver, a French doctor in economics, explains in detail how a tax on tourism can create revenue for the government but also cause welfare loss.
So today we're going to study the impact of the taxation on the tourism industry. When there is an elastic demand and when there is an inelastic demand. So when there is an elastic demand, we can see that we have our first equilibrium here, and with the taxation, the supply shifts to the left, and the new equilibrium has a higher price and a lower quantity. So this area constitutes the consumer surplus, and this one constitutes the producer surplus. But with the taxation, all this becomes the government revenue. So this will be a great form of revenue for the government, so that they can reinvest it to compensate the negative externalities that we obtain with tourism. But you can see that there's a part from the consumer surplus and the producer surplus that is not in the revenue. What is it? This is a loss. This constitutes what we call the welfare loss, or a deadweight loss. This is an economic loss that is led from the taxation. We cannot compensate it, or it is a loss. Therefore, if we have an inelastic demand, like this, it could be an inelastic supply, it's the same. The welfare loss will be even lower. But the only case for there's no loss, like there's only a government revenue, is when either the demand or either the supply is totally inelastic. But it is really rare, so most of the time we will have a loss. So even if it constitutes an important form of revenue for the government, the loss is inevitable. So
there are a small number of taxes that are primarily focused on the tourism sector. The most obvious of these is the occupancy tax. Occupancy taxes are levied on short-term residents in paid accommodation. They are typically charged per person and night. It generally depends on the standard of the accommodation. But as the cost increases, the expenditure of tourists in other sectors such as restaurants, museums, etc. gets decreased, finally affecting a lot of other sectors rather than tourism.
In order to get a more precise idea of the situation in Cyprus, the Secretary of Commerce, Clemente Nanayotou, has agreed to let us interview him.
So currently in Cyprus, we doesn't have any occupancy tax. But if we, as the government, decides to implement a new one of 3% tax per room in the hotels, depending on the pass-through and the elasticity price, the following will happen. So let's imagine we have a pass-through of 60% rate, meaning that 60% of the tax is paid by consumers, and the elasticity is minus 0.2. So this will lead to an increase in tourism expenditure because since it is an inelastic demand, the price isn't affected that much the demand. However, there will be a decrease in the producer revenues since they have to pay 40% of the tax and will also lose a small number of consumers. So if we study another case and if we have a pass-through of 100%, the consumers will pay 1.80% more, so this means that they will have to pay the entire tax. So in contrast, the revenue of the producers will not decrease as much since they don't have to pay the tax anymore, but they will suffer of a loss of tourists. So if now we take an elasticity of minus 1.2 and a pass-through of 60%, which represent a quite elastic demand, there will be a small decrease in tourism expenditures since they are really sensitive to the changes in prices. And this will cause a huge loss for the producer revenues.
Thank you for staying with us during this exceptional documentary, and we hope to see you next time.